Are you a bit lost, stressed, and confused when it comes to relationships and dating? Well, you're hardly alone. It seems like everybody is struggling with this these days, and we need those relationships more than ever, yet it seems more difficult than ever to actually form and to keep them. And doesn't it feel like it's really difficult to thrive these days? Like everything is falling apart all the time? Today, I wanted to do a deep dive into this topic and inquire what are the actual reasons behind this. And there's one word I have for you: uncertainty. But trust me, the long answer to this is anything but simple. I'm tired of simple answers. Simple answers never work. And this issue is complex, it's really difficult, and we need to dive deep into it and take a broad picture to really look into what is happening. So today I'm going to look at politics, at AI, at economics, at other things that create uncertainty in our world and how they impact our ability to form relationships as well. So if you're up for a deep dive, strap in and let's go. I will structure this video like a philosophical argument. We'll look at 7 premises and 2 conclusions, and 5 of those premises will first look at why humans kind of find it so difficult to thrive in the modern world and how finding relationships seems like a good idea to help them, but it isn't. And then I will add 2 extra premises and a conclusion that will show you how men in particular struggle with this topic. My first premise, I think it's not terribly controversial. It simply states that humans need stability in order to thrive. Or I will structure it in a logical form of a modus ponens, so if P then Q. So humans having stability is our P, humans thriving is our Q. And as you can see in here, we're negating both of those things, saying that humans do not have stability and can't thrive. And this gives us the first part of our modus ponens structure. If not P, then not Q. You might think it's pretty obvious that humans need a little bit of safety, stability, predictability in life in order to be able to thrive. But let's actually look into the research that confirms this. So already 80 years ago, Abraham Maslow has created his idea of the pyramid of needs. You might be familiar with this already, but if not, I will quickly walk you through this. The idea is simple. Humans have different needs, but the way those needs have to be met is not random. Instead, those needs are arranged in a structure that can be represented by this pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid are our most basic physiological needs. We need the air to breathe, we need the food to eat, we need the water to drink, we need shelter above our heads, and we need some clothing so that we don't die of cold exposure. These things need to be met before we can think about anything else. And the next level are our safety needs. This has to do with our feeling that nobody will rob and kill us tomorrow, but also that we have safe employment that allows us to buy food for tomorrow, and that our health is decent, and that we have the resources that will allow us to thrive in life. Now, both of those are what Maslow together called our basic needs. On top of our basic needs sit our psychological needs. And the first one of this is the need for love and belonging. And here we have a need to have an intimate partnership with someone, but also to have friends, to have family, to have people who make us feel like we belong to a community. And at the next level is what Maslow called our need for esteem. Now, in here comes our need to have status in the group, to have some prestige, to have people respect us, and to feel like we matter and we are somebody in the community. Finally, at the top is our need for self-actualization. This is our own personal need to become our best selves, to become the best, kindest, most generous, most good people we can be, who create amazing things and discover new knowledge. But it's also our need to create the best groups and societies ruled by justice and charity and the principle of peace, and basically to pursue all of those amazing things that life is for. So how does the pyramid metaphor work? Well, it's simple. You cannot have the top levels of the pyramid if you don't have the bottom levels sorted first. So you cannot focus on discovering new science or, I don't know, creating the most just, fair, and peaceful society if, first of all, you're feeling unsafe and don't have the food or the shelter needed to survive. So basically, first, we need to sort out the needs at the bottom of the pyramid before we can focus on the needs at the top. And this is pretty much what our first premise says. It says that without stability, so the safety that we need at the second level of the pyramid and just having our physiological needs provided for, we cannot thrive. We cannot focus on the top levels of the pyramid, thinking about the love and belonging that we need, the esteem that we need, or any form of self-actualization. Okay, so far so good. Now here's my second premise. Change creates instability. So notice in here we have our stability, this is our P again, we have instability, so that's a negation of the P, we don't have stability, and change is a new variable, let's call it R. Now, to really understand this premise, we'll need to unpack the notion of change, and this is what I'm going to do in the 2 next premises. The idea in here is that change happens at least on 2 levels, in the public sphere and in the private sphere. Just think about how the world has changed over the last 50 or even 20 years. I mean, 50 years ago, hardly anyone has even heard about the internet. I mean, climate change was not a thing. 20 years ago, we were laughing at the idea of smartphones. Women's rights might have been a bit ahead, but like gay rights or trans rights were still a bit unheard of. And when you think about politics, I mean, 30 years ago, Francis Fukuyama wrote a famous book called The End of History and the Last Man. And I'm not joking you, I'm quoting from this book right now. Humanity has reached the end of history as such. That is the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. I mean, we have reached the end point of look at the last 30 years of history. Have we reached a final point of development and political and economic thought? And is this Western liberal democracy? Because it sure does not seem so right now. And this is what all the neoliberal politics were based on. The idea was that politics is pretty much done. We figured out all the issues, and right now it's just a matter of keeping the business ticking. And if we learned anything from the last 20 years, is that all this ticking was really a time bomb, and it seems like we're living in the middle of the explosion, doesn't it? How many of you were worried about war 2 years ago? How many of you even thought that AI is not a domain of science fiction a year and a half ago? Meanwhile, right now it's challenging to completely upend all of our job markets. Things are changing at a breakneck speed. And now we're ready to look at the previous premise for a moment, because look at what this change creates. It creates a whole load of uncertainty and fear in people. It is the fear that we don't know what's what anymore, that we are not sure if we will have employment tomorrow, if our jobs will not be taken away by AI, if we will not be attacked by somebody, if terrorists won't come, refugees won't upset our social system, or a whole load of other things that can happen. And notice that it doesn't matter in here if the change that we're experiencing right now is for the better or not. The point is, things are changing. And people are afraid of the unknown. People are afraid of uncertainty. Even if the change is for the better, people will still experience some sort of psychological discomfort of having to deal with all of this uncertainty. In this world of uncertainty and fear, people tend to adopt this kind of every man for himself type attitude, in which we focus on our own basic needs at the expense of any kind of higher needs, or definitely any needs that have to do with building a better society for everyone and being charitable and just and fair towards other people. Now, in this way, I think that fear is not only a mind killer, fear is an ethics killer. Fear, in effect, puts our need to be good and fair and kind to other people on a second plan as we focus on our own needs first. But naturally, the social order is predicated on the idea that we do cooperate, that we do somehow help each other and not only work for ourselves. In fact, social order only exists because we agree to it. When we stop agreeing to it, it dissolves. And unfortunately, this is what we see in many places right now play out on both personal but also political levels, as countries become much more insular and care only about their own interest at the expense of the interest of everybody else. Now, what happens in these sort of situations is that people realize that as there's so much change and instability in the public sphere, it makes sense to try and escape into a private sphere. So in other words, it might be that out there in the world, there's storms and difficulties and all the sorts of chaos, but when we go back home, in the safe confines of our four walls, we can experience all of the safety and security that we crave in order to thrive. And it doesn't matter, we can go outside and we can conquer the world, but we have a safe haven that we can come back to. And let's be honest, historically, there were plenty of times in which the world was very unstable and it was very difficult to find peace outside. But people could always recede to this kind of comfort of family life and the peace and safety and security and predictability that it offered them, allowing them to then thrive. But this is the problem, because right now the truth is we can find very little of this safety and stability in private life as well. And why is that? Well, because some of the biggest social changes that we have experienced over the last decades have to do with how family life is structured and what people expect from each other as partners, as lovers, spouses, as family members. The family models that kept us going for centuries are questioned. The gender roles that people assumed within relationships and outside of them are also questioned. There are entire social movements dedicated to changing the way in which relationships between people function. And it's not only this, people have changing expectations of what they want from a partner. And it's regardless whether you think that dating apps are a force for good or for ill, they have massively changed how we relate to each other, how we meet new people, and how we start dating. Not only this, but we have a whole plethora of different family models and relationship models that are at play right now. And while in the past, the question of why do people get together and stay together seemed to have a simple answer for economic stability and to raise kids, now this is not obvious at all. People don't need to get together to have economic stability because, well, women can earn money just as much. And so many people don't even want to have kids. Instead, the reasons why we get together seem very varied, and it's very difficult to negotiate them sometimes. So this is the real kicker of this video. As it is so difficult to find the stability that we need to thrive in the outside world these days, we would want to find it in personal relationships, in love, and in dating. But in practice, we can't, or it is at least much more difficult than it was before, causing humans more and more anxiety, more and more division, and more difficulty in just managing everyday life. So what would be a sensible thing to do in this situation? Well, we can limit the amount of change and try to reintroduce a little bit more order so that the instability that we experience also diminishes. And unfortunately, I have bad news in here as well, because in practice, and this is not necessarily so, but empirically, it has been so in the last years at least, attempts at limiting change only end up adding more instability. And why is that? Well, because we just can't agree on how we should limit this change. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the gender debate right now. Because look, people disagree on whether certain things should change or not. Think of all the endless debates between feminists and anti-feminists about how family life should be and what is the role of women in society. People also disagree as to how much change we should have and also how much change we can take at any given time. Some people think that feminism has not gone far enough. Other people think that it has gone too far, and people just cannot agree on this. Moreover, people disagree on where this change should happen. Maybe there's enough change that already happened in here. Maybe now the change needs to happen elsewhere. And a lot of those disagreements have to do with the underlying current of whom does this change benefit and who actually wins on this change and who feels like they are losing. And people, once again, see those things very differently, which means that everyone is pulling in their own direction. And instead of creating more stability and adding to the order of the world, attempts at creating this order done by different people in different ways only add to the chaos, and the chaos adds to the instability. So at the end of the day, we do not succeed at removing the change. And instead, we have a situation in which all of those types of change end up creating more and more instability, which in turn means that people cannot thrive. So this is the conclusion of those premises, showing you how all this uncertainty that comes with all the change means that humans cannot thrive. Now, obviously, this needs to be qualified a little bit. We cannot say that humans cannot thrive. Obviously, some people are better at it, some people are worse at it, some people find it easier, some people find it harder. And there's good reasons for it as well. And the first one might be a simple personal reason. I mean, people have different personalities. And if you're familiar with the big 5 personality traits, one of them is called openness to experience. And this has to do with how tolerant you are to new changing things. And what psychologists have found is that people are generally normally distributed with respect to openness to experience. What does this mean? Well, it means that very few people are not okay with any change. Very few people are okay with any amount of change, and most people are somewhere in the middle. Most people are okay with a certain amount of change, but not too much. They are tolerant to change to a certain extent. But naturally, as the world changes and our relationships change, it turns out that the amount of change that is actually out there in the world, it is much greater than the average amount of change that humans are actually ready to accept, which effectively means that most humans end up not comfortable with the amount of change that is actually happening in the world, while only a minority of humans end up being happy with it and comfortable with it. But it's not just our psychological makeup that determines how likely we are to tolerate change. It will also have to do with our external circumstances and how much resources do we have that actually make us safe regardless, that allow us to tolerate a little bit more change and instability in other domains. So for example, if you're born rich, if you're born to a loving family, if you actually do have a partner who takes care of you and makes you feel safe and secure at home, you will be much more likely to tolerate a large amount of change. And we can see that in the world again, because look at who are the people who are quite happy with the amounts of social and relationship change that we're experiencing right now. Well, those are the people who are more well off. They have good jobs, they have educated families, they have education themselves. They are the people who know that whatever happens out there in the world, they'll be fine. Your financial and emotional privilege is also probably distributed in such a way that few people have very little of it, few people have loads of it, and most of people are somewhere in the middle. And now we have this situation in which on one hand, we have some minority of people who are just fine. They're tolerant to change, they'll be fine, they know that they have the resources to withstand anything, and they're open to experience. And on the other hand, we have a majority of people who will not be fine, who do not have the same sort of dose of openness and who do not have enough privilege to know that they will be fine regardless. And it is those people who experience the most uncertainty and fear and the most need to re-establish some sort of order that is familiar to them, that they feel comfortable with, and that allows them to limit the amount of instability in their life and thus to thrive. They will be the people who say things such as, we don't know what's what anymore. Why can't men just be men and women will be women? What are all of those pronouns that you're suddenly using? Why can't we just use he and she? Now, on top of all of this, your tolerance to a specific type of change will be determined by whether you see this change as benefiting you or is this change something that you personally wanted. So, for example, to come back to gender war and feminism, I personally feel quite comfortable with the changes that feminism proposes because I see them as benefiting me. They allow me to have things that I really want in life. They allow me to have a partner who is a real equal, who really is interesting, fantastic, and doesn't just do what I tell her, but is challenging me and brings something really new and exciting into my life. They allow me to have female friends who are absolutely fantastic people and to express myself and my feelings without the fear of being judged and forced into a certain gender role of what men should be like. I don't like all the things that men are supposed to like. I don't care about sports, cars, or DIY. It also provides me with a great alternative with the constant one-upmanship war that men are playing with each other to gain status over each other and climb the hierarchy of lobsters or whatever else it is these days. I don't fancy playing this game. I think it is a bit daft and I would rather not be involved in that at all. And what I find good in feminism for myself is just the capacity to be outside of what I see as a bit of a silly hierarchy system. And that's not to say that I don't have any problems with feminism or what specific feminists tend to do, but on the whole, the changes that they propose seem to be the sort of changes that I would like to see in society myself, and therefore I'm much more likely to be happy with them. But this might be different for other people who might not see those changes as benefiting them and therefore be much more resistant to them. And it is also very specific to this domain. I might be okay with the changes that feminism proposes, but I'm not quite as okay with the changes that the technological developments in AI are proposing right now. That doesn't mean that I'm accepting of any change, it just means that I'm accepting of the specific changes in this domain. Now, I hope that all of this argument also really shows you why people care so much about some things that to many others might seem quite trivial. And here, let me use the example of pronouns. Many people have very strong feelings about whether you call yourself he, she, or use other pronouns such as they. To me and to many people, it might seem like, well, who cares? At the end of the day, just let people call themselves whatever they want to call themselves. Why is it such a big deal? But I hope that this argument shows you why it is such a big deal to many people. And it is such a big deal because this and other examples of social change effectively become this kind of embodiment of chaos, embodiment of uncertainty, embodiment of the fear that things are changing, that we don't know what's what anymore, that the world is no longer familiar, that it's dangerous, that we're not used to it, and that we need to focus desperately on re-establishing our safety. And this is why people who might never even meet a trans person or a queer person who uses different pronouns or wants to express their gender in a different way care so much about this. Because in the world in which there's so little stability both in the public and the private sphere, even mentioning such thing seems like a threat that some people just cannot bear. So now let's zoom in back into the argument and look at the last two premises and conclusion in which I want to argue that men in particular have good reasons to experience these sort of issues to a greater extent. The first premise has to do with the traditional male gender role, which, despite all of the changes that we have seen in society and relationships in the last year, is still very strong and it is still reinforced in men through multiple channels. And that is that traditionally men were seen as the creators of order, as the ones whose job it was to organize their tribes, to bring order to society, to create laws, to create religions, to create structures which are both physical and institutional that organize social life, to create states, hierarchies. It's all things that create the sort of safety and security and a baseline of predictability which allows social life to thrive, and that current change is threatening. And I don't really want to get into a debate right now of whether this is a thing that men somehow are naturally better at than women or naturally should be doing than women. There's a whole nurture debate in here, and I really don't care right now if it is in men's genes or not to pursue hierarchies and status and order much more than women. It doesn't matter. The point is, historically, in our world, this is how things played out. And to this day, men still see themselves as protectors, providers, and the bringers of order. And this means that when this order is challenged, when there's change which brings down everything that men have created in there, men feel it particularly strongly because it is not just some order that is being questioned, it is their order that is being questioned. And I really don't want to get into any discussions on whether the order that men have created in the past has been good or bad. I think it's once again more complicated than that. There is a lot of elements of it that were good, but there are also undeniably elements of it which privileged some people over others, made that some people had better access to resources and opportunities than others, and so forth. But remember the earlier premises. It doesn't matter if the change that is happening is for the better, for the worse, it's a good change or it's a bad change. The very fact that any change is happening is interpreted by humans as threatening to the stability and safety that they need in order to thrive. And if this change happens to things that you see yourself as having created, it impacts you all the more. But it's not just that we see the order that men have created fall apart. No, it is also that until this day, men are told continuously that we should be the protectors, providers, and otherwise creators of stability. And how are we supposed to do that in a world which is just so chaotic? So the narrative that we're being sold is effectively asking us to do something that is more difficult than ever, and thus more men than ever feel like they fail at the basic tenet of being a man. With this in mind, it is hardly any wonder that men should turn to anyone who will promise them that they will be able to teach them how to achieve the thing that has been so difficult to achieve. And I think that when you try to actually analyze the sort of things that a lot of men are criticized for right now and analyze a lot of what goes under toxic masculinity, you can really understand a lot of it as men's attempts to reintroduce order or to find some sort of safety in this chaotic world. I think that in this context, it is actually no wonder at all that men tend to react much harder to the changes that we are experiencing in the modern world, and specifically much harder to those changes which they do not see as benefiting them. That's changes that have to do with how relationships work, with how gender is expressed, what sort of social roles they're meant to play, and stuff like this. And thus, men are much more likely to want to reintroduce the status quo on things such as pronouns, or how many genders there are, or whether the sort of freedoms that feminism is fighting for are actually right or not. When you look at what men are craving when it comes to dating right now and why all the pickup artists and everyone else is so popular, is because what they offer is a semblance or a promise of certainty. They offer that if you follow those rules, you will get the effect, that this technique works 100% of the time. And what is this? What are they selling? They are selling certainty. They are selling safety and feeling of predictability. They are selling exactly the thing that men and humans in general are missing in the world right now. And recall how all this fear and uncertainty that is created by change lead us to have this mentality of every man for himself. And we focus on our own safety and getting things for ourselves before we focus on other people. Notice once again that this is the rhetoric that is being sold to men specifically right now, as pickup artists focus on getting the stuff that you want, regardless how the women feel about it. And how all of the rhetoric around alpha males focuses on making men feel like they are there against the world, like everyone wants to steal their woman, take their money, and eat their cookies. And everything is a constant struggle of us against the uncertain, weird world, and how the measures of success is creating more order, creating more stability. And the alpha rhetoric, the top values have nothing to do with things like adventure or creativity or anything like this, because those things tend to be a bit chaotic. Instead, they have to do with things like making money, because that gives you a lot of safety, finding a stable relationship, because that gives you a lot of safety, and having a lot of prestige and respect from other people, because that gives you a lot of safety. You would be absolutely right to think that what is happening in here really is that all of this uncertainty and fear that are out there, and men in particular, are effectively exploited by people who want to push a certain agenda, who just want the money of the men who are experiencing all of this because they want to sell them this certainty and this idea that they can actually have control over their lives. And they sell it to them in the form of pickup artist advice, of alpha advice, and all sorts of other courses that promise men that they will once again have control of their lives. And the thing is that many of those solutions proposed kind of work in the short term, because they make people feel, at least for a moment, like they have the safety and control that they crave. But we know that in the long term, they mostly don't work, and they're just unethical because they make people focus on those basic needs rather than the actual higher needs that we should probably be focusing more in order to thrive. And yes, this is absolutely exploitative and horrible, and it effectively feeds on the social situation and personal situation that many of those men experience. And before you criticize them, it is very important that you think about all of this uncertainty that objectively is out there in the world and in our relationships, that really impacts men and makes it very difficult for humans in general, but for men in particular, to actually find themselves in this world. All right, enough of all of this explanation and arguing. The big question is, what can we do about this? Well, here's some good news. This whole thing is not about just doom and gloom and telling you how things don't work. It also has some power to tell us what we can actually do to make things better. So I want to propose two solutions in here that you can implement in your personal life to increase your feeling of safety and your capacity to deal with all the change, and thus enable you to thrive. The first has to do with increasing the amount of safety you have in your own life, irrespective of all of the change and uncertainty that is happening elsewhere. So this is things that you can do to bring safety into yourself. And the second has to do with increasing your tolerance for change. So even if all this change happens, it just doesn't bother you quite as much and you still feel safe where you are. Notice that both of those solutions recognize that we have very little influence, most of us, as to how much change actually happens in the world. Yes, we should absolutely work towards making the world a more peaceful and safe place. But first of all, let's focus on what we can do to make ourselves more comfortable with the change. The first thing you can do is create a little bit more safety at the base of your own personal pyramid. So what does this mean? It means that you need to arrange your life in such a way that it provides you with the feeling of safety and it provides you with the feeling of stability that might be lacking elsewhere. And this might be big things such as finding a good job or things like this, but I understand that those things are difficult. So start from small things, such as having a good routine or making sure that the place you live in is tidy and clean. And this sort of advice is nothing new, of course. Already Confucius was talking about this in the 5th century BC. But with the argument that I was showing you in here, I hope that you will understand why it's so important. It's because we can only take a certain amount of uncertainty in our lives and we need a certain level of safety. And it sometimes doesn't really matter even where the safety and uncertainty is, as long as we can maintain a level which helps us thrive. And this leads me to the next point, which is that you will never, ever be able to order absolutely everything around you. And this means that you need to pick your battles smart. Create orders where its impact is really big and the cost is really low. So for example, organizing a really good schedule for yourself is a fantastic way to introduce order that will allow you to be more tolerant to change and less bothered by it and thrive. But to pick an example I was already talking about, launching a massive crusade against what pronouns people are using seems like such a waste of time. It requires a massive amount of energy. You will be fighting a lot of people who are against this. And what do you gain? I mean, at the end of the day, okay, even if you win, people will use different pronouns. Will that really make you feel that much safer in life? I doubt it. So it seems like it's just a waste of time. Instead, it would be much better if you focus on things that actually matter. So once again, pick your battles. And finally, on this point, well, of course, a dictatorship is a form of order as well. And a person with a gun telling everyone else what to do is a form of order. But is this really the sort of order that we want? I think it is extremely important that at all times we have a good eye on whether the order and safety that we're creating are actually fair and ethical. An order which unfairly privileges some people over other people is not a good order, because yes, it might give some safety to some of those people, but the others will still be unhappy and they will not like it and they will still experience all of the negative effects that we've been talking about before and they will not be able to thrive. So in creating order around you, it is extremely important that you do it in a way that does not harm anyone else and is not unethical towards anybody else. Now, the second way you can deal with how change impacts your capacity to thrive in life is to just basically increase your tolerance to change so that it just doesn't bother you quite so much. And remember the three different things that I was discussing which impact our capacity to deal with change. One of them had to do with just the level of privilege we had, the level of safety we have in our life otherwise. Do we have a safe family structure? Do we have a good job and things like this? So this is about, once again, creating order. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about before already in here, and it's just more of the same. So let's leave this one aside. Obviously, your tolerance to change will increase if you already have enough structure and order and safety in your life elsewhere. But there are also other things. So we talked about how your openness to experience, one of the big 5 personality traits, can impact your capacity to be tolerant to change. Personalities are difficult to change, but not impossible. And you can absolutely train your capacity for openness to new experiences, and you can develop it the same way you can develop any virtue or any kind of mental trait. How do you do that? Fortunately for you, it's actually really fun. A great way to train your openness to new experiences is just to travel, to go see different places, different people, look at how people live differently in other parts of the world, find out what they like, what they dislike, and why. Talk to people. Talk to people you like, but also talk to people you disagree with, or talk to people that you think you might not have anything in common with. Yes, it might be a bit daunting at the beginning, but you'll be surprised how many super interesting things they have to say and how many new avenues of your life they will open for you. Similarly, you can think about just trying new things, trying new hobbies, maybe try and change your routine a little bit, find new friends, find something that will basically make you feel like you have something new and exciting in your life that will allow you to look at it from a different perspective. When you do that often enough and you start learning that all of those different perspectives are not even particularly scary, it's just people thinking differently, you will be much more likely to increase your openness to experience and thus your tolerance for change and your capacity to deal with it in such a way that it does not increase your fear, uncertainty, and diminish your capacity to thrive. And lastly, the third thing I was pointing out was that people have a very different tolerance to change when they see it as good for them. They see this sort of change as something that benefits them or it's something that they themselves wanted. So I very highly encourage you to look at the things that are changing with a slightly different eye and see not only the things that threaten you with this, not only the things in which you might lose out on this sort of change, but also, is there anything in it that's actually good for you? Because I think that many, especially men, are really missing on the sort of changes, the social changes that are happening right now, which actually benefit them. Like I said myself, I find it very easy to deal with the changes that feminists are proposing because I see them as benefiting me. So when you think about the change in a particular domain, just look at it and think, are there actually things in this change that are good for you? Because once you find them, you will find it much easier to be tolerant to this change and not let it impact you in the same way it does right now. And from the perspective of those people who do want this change, it is absolutely essential that you help those people who don't see how this change might benefit them to see it. So, for example, if you are a feminist and you would like to have more men on your side, you should absolutely do anything you can to help those men see that this change is actually also good for them. It is not helpful at all to show men over and over again how they're losing out on feminism. But if you show men and other people how this change is good for them, they will be able to internalize it and they will be much more likely to be comfortable with it and want to help you with making it happen. So let's quickly review the content of this video. I structured the whole thing around the philosophical argument, aimed to show to you that humans find it difficult to thrive in times of change, and that all this change impacts men even harder. In the first part of the argument, I was trying to show you that the world is changing in the public sphere, the world is also changing in the private sphere, which introduces a great amount of change, which in turn creates a lot of instability. Meanwhile, our attempts to limit this instability end up only adding to it because we all are pulling in a slightly different way, and this only creates even more chaos in the world. Now, the starting premise was that without this sort of stability, humans cannot thrive or find it at least very difficult to thrive in the modern world. And this is what we're experiencing right now. This is how many people find it so difficult to find their place in life, to feel like they're safe, to feel like they can thrive, and both in their professional, public, and also in their private relationship lives. So this is our first conclusion, that humans find it very difficult to thrive in the current context. I have then argued that us men in particular find this psychologically difficult because we are the ones who have been traditionally seen as creators of order and bringers and maintainers of this order. So when it is torn down, it is so difficult to deal with. But this is hardly a thing of the past. Today, there are still many voices, ranging from established religions to online influencers, who still tell men that this is the social role that they should be performing. They should be the bringers of order, the protectors, the providers, and the people who keep the uncertainty away. And in a world in which this has been made so difficult because of all of those external factors that we have been talking about, this means that men continuously feel like they fail at being men. And this requirement is just not there for the other genders, or at least it's not there to the same extent. So it is no wonder that it is men who fall for all sorts of manipulators and other people who promise them the thing that they have been told that they need to achieve in life, but find it so difficult to achieve. Instead of following these sort of promises, which I think are very often very simplistic and very often very immoral, I think men should turn to the two solutions that I'm proposing myself. And notice that both of those solutions basically assume that we can do, on a personal level, we can do very little with the amount of change and uncertainty that there is out there in the world. Out there in politics, most of us will have very little influence on what political, economic, or AI technological situation we are in. However, we can still do quite a lot to feel ourselves like we are safe and we can thrive. So the two things we can do is, first of all, we can create some order and safety around ourselves, and we can do this just by arranging our own personal lives in such a way that makes us feel safe. Now, it is important in this thing that we pick our battles. It is important that we're not trying to spend a lot of energy on something that brings us very small effect, effects, but instead spend little energy on something that creates a big effect. And naturally, it is very important, and this goes counter to a lot of the advice that you guys will get online. It is very important that in this process, we do not lose sight of the moral aspects of our actions and that we stay committed to ethical concepts such as equality, fairness, or peace. So that's the first solution, is to create a little bit more of this order around yourself. But then there's a second solution as well, which basically says that you can increase your tolerance to change. So even if you don't have so much safety, you can just not care so much when the change is happening. And what that means is that it just doesn't impact you so much. You don't care, you can still thrive. And one way of doing that, obviously, is to create a living situation for yourself in which this change really doesn't impact you, because whatever happens, you'll be fine. But then you can also simply train your mental capacity for openness. You can train your personality trait of openness so that you are just the sort of person who just likes things changing. You like adventure, you like the new things and all of that. And finally, you can look at the specific things that are changing and try to, for a moment, put your discomfort of change on the shelf and actually inquire, what is it that is changing? Because in all likelihood, many of the elements of the things that are changing are actually benefiting you personally as well. They are the sort of things that you would actually want to see in the world. And once you start realizing that this change is good for you, it will be so much easier to accept it and be fine with it and be tolerant of it. So I hope that this video gave you a little bit more perspective on why it is objectively true that it is just quite difficult to thrive in this constantly changing, uncertain world, and why you might be feeling like the rug is being pulled from underneath your feet all the time, that something is amiss, something is wrong, something is not okay. Why you might be bothered by the fact that it just seems like nobody knows what's what anymore, and that when you try to find a little bit of peace and safety and stability in your relationships, it is so frustrating that even there, it is none to be had. But you're not alone in all of this struggle. We are all struggling with these things, and it is very important that we really understand them, because understanding is the cornerstone of finding solutions which will actually work. That's it for now. I'm Dr. Simon Vogt, philosopher and explorer of modern masculinity, handing you the man's compass.